if you're a guest to a house, you're really blessed when they say we've replaced the bubble wrap.
Welcome to the ladies of Tellico Village. My name is Joan Dorsey, and this show features interviews with some of the most fascinating and talented women living right here in Tellico Village. I know you'll enjoy today's remarkable lady. Her story is special, her life has been remarkable, and I feel so honored to have her here today to share it all with us. Sit back and enjoy this episode brought to you by the volunteers at Tellico Village Network. My guest today is another one of those amazing, fantastic, unique ladies that lives right here in Tellico Village. What's unique about her is the lifestyle she programmed for herself to follow in her retirement. Changed many things, even her marriage. She had an itch always for studying cultures, different cultures. But she didn't want to just read about them. She wanted to live with a different culture, and that's just what she did. You're going to enjoy her. She had an amazing adventure that lasted 9 months, a year, for 3 years in a row. Sometimes it was educational. Sometimes it was fun. Sometimes it was scary. And sometimes it was downright dangerous. I would like to welcome my guest who's never had the words, I can't do that, in her vocabulary since the day she was born. I'd like to welcome my guest, Sheryl Warmbold. Welcome, Sheryl. I'm so glad to have you here. You've been a delight to work with.
Thank you, Joan.
And now that you're here, how do you like our new set? I mean, I love it. How do you...
It looks wonderful. It's so cozy. We should be in our bathrobes and enjoying the,
Maybe we can do that for a future show.
Yeah.
I think we need to just jump way back to the beginning and get that covered, because we're going to spend quite a bit of time on this fantastic cultural trip that you took.
Yes.
You were born in the Midwest in
Lake Forest, Illinois.
You had a brother.
I have 5 siblings, but my older brother had a very nice friend.
Yes, and we'll hear about that very nice friend a little bit later. Your mom was a mom, but she also had something else she did on occasion.
My mother owned a sporting store for skiing and snowmobiling.
And Dad?
My dad was the CFO for Great Lakes Navy Base, so kind of regimented in our household.
Where did the little guy that was your brother's friend from elementary school show up into your higher school experiences?
Well, we've known each other almost our whole life, but I wasn't allowed to date till I was 16. So at 16, we decided we could date. You know, my brother had to go with us. But we also did gymnastics together in high school, so it was one extra way of
having
hanging
a gymnastics date, right?
Yes.
Okay. So you both graduated from college. You both worked for a while. You had 2 children.
Yes.
You had 2 busy professional careers and moved a lot. I think the first place you said you lived, the first state, was Connecticut.
Yes.
But you ended up in retirement as an empty nester in Tellico Village.
Yes.
And in this empty nest, you got what I think was referred to as a culture itch.
Yes, I did.
Tell me what a culture itch is.
Well, I had taken care of my mother-in-law for 4 years and teaching at the same time. So I thought I needed a little reward because I wanted to explore some other cultures that I've always read about and I've experienced in other countries. So I applied for a job in Alaska.
How did you break this news to your husband that you were leaving for 9 months to go to a different culture in Alaska?
Well, we've been together a long time, so this was not uncommon for me to surprise him with something. But I sat down at dinner and I just announced that I have a new teaching position, and he was very excited. And I said, but it's a little distance away, and it was in Alaska, and he was straight-faced, and he said, do I have to go? And I said, you're really not invited for this adventure.
What was his reaction the next day when it all sunk in that you were going to be gone for 9 months?
He was quite glad and happy for me. He was glad because he doesn't like cold weather, and I do. And he was happy because I wanted to seek out this culture, and he was happy at home.
Now, you talked about a process you went through. It was, you kind of called it the 100 Meals Project.
Before I left for school up in Alaska to teach, in August I would make him 100 dinners, entrees, and then about 90 side dishes. And they were all individual in little containers, and he'd put them in the freezer, and he would set one out before he goes to work. So before I left in August, he had 100 meals, and then I'd come home for Christmas. Before I went back in January, I'd make him another 100 meals.
You must have a large freezer.
Well, I think he borrowed a few neighbors' freezers too.
How long does it take to cook 100 meals?
Oh, it took me about a week, you know. One day I did one meal. He really likes sweet and sour chicken. And then another day I would do all the meatloaf for him and all the sides.
The drive up, anything unusual? You said it took 7 or 8 days, but anything out of the ordinary or anything of a problem? It
was beautiful scenery, and it was a time to talk about what I'm going to do. But when we got to the Alaskan highway, it was an adventure because it's just a dirt road. Really? And a gas station is every 400 miles. So you fill up whether you need it or not. And it's not like a gas station. It is a shack with one little pump, and that's it. And if they're out, then you're out as well.
All right, you went to Anchorage, is that correct?
Outside of Anchorage, yes.
Outside of Anchorage. And your first impressions of Anchorage?
Well, my first impression of Anchorage was a little western town that never came out of the early 1900s. It was very rustic.
What were you going to teach?
I was going to teach reading and social emotional health.
What were the kids like? How were they different from students you had in the past?
The kids were fantastic. They still have my heart. They were different because all my teaching career, I'd always been in the upper level private school sector. And this one, I was not. The schools were very basic. They kind of look like double wides put together for a lot of the classrooms. We probably had 13 different cultures represented in any class that I taught.
What were the predominant ones?
The Native Americans, and then a lot of Samoans.
You settled in, you had an apartment, and you had coworkers. Were there other people there from the mainland that were teaching too that you made friendships with?
The first day of teacher orientation, it was a big room of all the new teachers, and I sat at a table, and there was 9 of us at the table, and 8 of us were from the lower 48, just having a cultural experience. Our husbands stayed behind and families while we came up for a cultural experience.
Now I'm thinking of something humorous. When your husband stayed behind, you figured out times where you could meet. You could go part way and he could come part way and you could meet. And the thing I remember you saying that I thought was so sweet was you said, I didn't have one honeymoon. I had multiple honeymoons.
Yes.
So where did you usually meet? It was always the same place?
No, because of where Anchorage is, we always met where it was one flight out for me. It might have been 2 for him, but he was in the lower 48 and was a little bit easier to travel. So one flight out from Anchorage would be Seattle, Denver, Chicago, Minnesota, or LA, or Hawaii.
But one day he called you and he'd made a purchase.
Mm-hmm.
And this was the beginning of a marriage transformation, I think.
Yes, it was. I was in Alaska having my experiences, and he purchased his motorcycle, a Harley Davidson, for his beginning of his experiences down in Memphis, Tennessee.
So it was the beginning of a very unique and different marriage. Up in Alaska, how did you react to the 24/7 sunlight dark? Was that a difficult adjustment?
The adjustment was on the 24 hours light. When I arrived at my apartment, we were moving furniture and hanging stuff, nailing and putting up pictures, and all of a sudden at the door was a knock from a neighbor. And she said, "Do you realize it's 1:30 in the morning and I have to get up for work?" I said, "It is?" Because it was bright. So I had to always be cognizant of the light time, not so much the dark time.
Now, did you all the teachers from the lower states, did you all stay in the same apartment complex?
Pretty, well, half of us did. We all became roommates the second year.
What about when it started to snow? Now, you're from the Midwest, and
Yeah.
I am too, and so 42 inches is, so it snowed.
Yeah.
But what about Alaska?
When that snowfall came, it wasn't just a little baby snowfall. It was gigantic, and it stayed from October until about April. But they didn't use salt on anything, the sidewalks, the streets, because of the animals. The deer and the moose and the bear would all eat that, and we'd be having problems.
What were the parents of the students like?
Schooling wasn't number one, but family survival was. So I might have a student in class one day and not see them for 3 or 4 weeks because they're working at fish camp, getting all the fish that they need for the rest of the year to live on.
Oh.
And in Alaska, we have called the Fab Five. In order to go out at winter, you needed to have snow boots, snow pants, jacket, hat, and gloves. So we allowed time in the day to have the Fab Five put on and Fab Five taken off. And if you didn't have it, you didn't go out for recess, or gym class was always outside. So
Even in the winter?
Even in the winter, yeah. We did snowshoeing, they did soccer in the snow. Everything was the same, it just we had 50,
But they
60
would have
inches.
plowed the soccer field, I take it.
No, we just pack it down and you just play on top of that.
Okay.
So I had this family of Samoans, and there were 5 young boys, and they would come in. Now it's minus 20 degrees, and they're in shorts and flip-flops and a t-shirt. And they couldn't go outside because they didn't have the Fab Five.
Oh.
So I finally called the father, and the father came in so I could talk to him about the Fab Five. And the father shows up in shorts, flip-flops, and I said, "Thank you for coming in. Boys, go out and play," because
Okay.
it was what they did.
I'd read about the Iditarod. Tell me about the dogs first.
Well, the dogs are interesting. They're kind of mutts. They're not huskies. They're not anything spectacular. They try to keep them in the same family down the lineage, but they're just little puppies. I mean, they're not these big dogs.
Where do they get them? Do they have them donated or do they purchase them?
They purchase them, and usually they come from either Seattle or over in Canada.
Tell me about how they're trained so that you can connect them up and they'll pull a sled without dangling a hot dog in front of them.
They are the athletes in Alaska. And that's what's funny. Down in the lower 48, we have basketball and football stars, and people think of that. Up there, you talk about the dogs, Balto, and you talk about Seavey's dogs, and, everybody talks about the dogs, and then the mushers as who they want to be when they grow up. But these dogs are trained, and they are treated so well. They get their food, they get fresh hay, they like to sleep out on the snow, not necessarily in their dog houses. And they are trained, and they are set up so that the lead dog is in front, and the bigger, huskier ones are called the wheels, and they're closest to the sled, and they pull most of the weight.
All right, now mushers aren't
Yes.
the dogs. Tell me
No.
about the mushers.
The mushers are wonderful. Again, they're treated like lower 48 have in athletes. These are gentlemen and women who have been doing this since they were knee-high to a dog. They travel 1,100 miles from Anchorage to Nome in conditions that you and I just can't imagine. Well, now I can. But they are treated like royalty, and they have everything in their sled for them on the back of it. Everything in front is for the dogs.
They often carry guns.
Oh, yes. Yes.
And why is that?
Well, because you're going through areas where, there can be times like Seavey, one of the mushers, he ties himself onto his sled because after being awake for, so many hours, he's tired, so he just nods off and sleeps for a while. These dogs just continue where they want to go. But they do run into bears, and they do run into moose, and they run into all sorts of other animals that don't want them nearby. So it's for safety issues.
But tell me a little bit about moose.
They rule the roost around towns. In school, you have, how you have crossing guards? Well, every school has a moose guard. And so I was the moose guard on more than one occasion. And you have a whistle, and you stand outside and make sure there's no moose nearby, because they can be very aggressive, especially if there's an infant one nearby. So you blow your whistle, and then the kids know they can exit school. And one time I looked this way and there was no moose, so I let the kids go. And little did I know, coming around the side of the building was Mom and 2 babies, and it got a little ugly.
What do you do if they approach you?
The kids know enough to not run, but to walk backwards and get to cover. I camped north of the Arctic Circle on several occasions, and we did a bun tent. And a bun tent is just a cloth tent, but you sleep on the snow. There's no bottom to a tent. And inside the tent you have a wood-burning stove. You understand what happens with warm and snow. So you wake up and you're in probably 2 inches of wet. Before we fell asleep, in comes the moose, and he had a huge rack. And he got inside the tent, but he couldn't figure out how to get out of the tent. So here's the 6 of us in a tent with a moose, not a happy camper, staring at us and getting a little agitated. So 2 of the people in the camp snuck under, pulled the tents aside. The rest of us grabbed our guns just in case, and the moose backed itself out. There's been some close calls with moose.
So did you take lessons, or did you always know how to shoot a gun?
I learned quickly in Alaska how to shoot.
Tell me about the dogs and their paws.
Oh, for the Iditarod. Because they're athletes, we want to make sure they're taken care of so well. We make this stuff that looks like Pepto-Bismol, only it's made with goop and lots of lanolin. And we have to, I was a dog caretaker for 3 Iditarods. You goop it on their feet, and then you put a little bootie on, so when they're running on the snow, and it's cold, their pads don't get cracked and infected. So we make lots of goop. Every dog that runs that 1,100 miles goes through 5 gallons. Every dog gets 5 gallons of goop.
I want to ask you first, I want to talk a little bit about housing, so how all these cultures, some of them live. Are there igloos in Alaska?
No, there's not igloos in Alaska. They're mostly in Upper Canada. But what we have are, in Alaska, they have a lot of tents made out of animal skins or smaller wood building. And the only means of transportation is a snow machine, or what we call down here a snowmobile.
So not everyone in Alaska has an airplane?
No, they don't. My first airplane ride to Fairbanks was a 13-year-old pilot.
13-year-old?
13, and I kind of was taken back going, I'm not so sure. And she goes, well, I've been delivering the mail for 5 years. And it's like, this is scary. But she did a very good job.
You won an ice fishing contest.
Yes, I did. I won an ice fishing contest, but the big contest I won was halibut fishing. So I paid my $2.50 to be part of the lottery. So whoever caught the biggest fish ended up with the money. And I went out that day with my roommates, and it was the last fish thrown. We threw out 6 inches of herring, and I threw it out, and almost instantly I'm sliding across the boat bow, and somebody grabbed me at the last minute, so we knew it was going to be big. And I reeled it in and reeled it in, and after 30 minutes I was tired. And I said, can somebody help? And the captain said, we can help, but it will disqualify you, and that's a big boy coming. So I said, okay, I can do this. And I did. I reeled it in for a little bit over 30 minutes. And then they had to get it back up onto the boat. And I said, save the cheeks, because halibut cheeks are the prime of the fish. So we brought it up, and I actually hooked a 178-pound halibut. And because I was the only woman that month to hook a fish that big, I won my $1,500.
Okay, that was a good investment.
Yeah,
for the little bit you put in. You talked about a golden nugget race.
The golden nugget race is the first ever all-female marathon, triathlon. And so I had to participate because that's what you do when you're in Alaska. You do everything. And it was an interesting race because you have to swim, then you bike ride, and then you run. And at the end, we had to take a detour from the finish line, going to the finish line, because baby cubs were up in the trees where our path was, and they were swiping at people below. So we had to have a few extra, probably a good 3 or 4 extra blocks to get that finish line.
Now, there was somebody standing in the water in a black Speedo. Please tell our audience that story. As it relates to a regular race where you swim forward, you hit the wall, you flip and go back. This was circular swimming.
Circular swimming.
So they...
Yes, and so I'm not used to circular swimming, and there's 8 women to every lane swimming, and this gentleman who was making sure we touched the wall, he decided to step inside the pool and sit there and rest. And I came to make my turn, and unfortunately, his Speedo was right where I needed to make my turn. So I tapped him once, and then I kicked as I pushed off. But
and he just stayed there and waited for the next person.
Yes, he did.
I want to interject here. You were a non-swimmer, and in this whole adventure you've taken, you seriously took swimming lessons. Mm-hmm. You did workouts to enhance running. Mm-hmm. You probably took gun lessons to use a shoot gun. But the swimming amazed me because you seriously took swimming here so you could do this.
Yes, I had to be over 55 in order to learn how to swim because I was not a swimmer. And it's a very unorthodox swim. All the other women were in and out in 15 minutes or less than 15 minutes, and I'm still in there swimming away. But I caught up with them on the other 2 parts.
Tell me about the Bear Island.
The Bear Island was awesome. I was supposed to go home for summer, but I postponed it by 2 weeks so I could go live with the bears on Admiralty Island. There are more grizzly bears there per capita than anywhere else in the world.
When you went on some hiking.
Yes.
And I believe that's where you said every now and then there are people just with guns.
Oh, yes.
To protect hikers. I mean, doesn't that take a little bit of the fun out of hiking, be passing all these people with guns?
Well, it was kind of a safety net. I looked at it that way.
Well, that's true.
Because on the island, the weeds were taller than I am. I'm only 5 foot. So I could have been easily disappeared quickly. I always, there was always a bear nearby. You could hear them huffing, and you could see them, and they could see you, and you're told just keep on walking and don't pay any attention to them. Easy for them to say.
You told me about hunting. You went on a group that hunted. Mm-hmm. And tell me about, let's say you go up the mountain and you shoot an animal. Assuming they have licenses to hunt like they do here. And you said your favorite part of when there's a killing, what did you always rather do?
Yeah. Well, people always like to take me on hunts because my favorite part was called dressing the animal. After you shoot it and debowel it, and then you have to cut it into small pieces to haul it back. And I would love doing that part. That was my favorite part, was making these little packages.
That's a really bloody story.
Yeah, it is. And then you'd put it on the sled and you'd have to pull it 5 miles back out or wherever you were. If it's a bear during berry season, it was good. It was berry bear. But if it's a bear during fish season, it's terrible. It tastes real fishy.
All right, I'm going to get to something very different than hunting and hiking and all that. You told me a funny story about bubble wrap. All of you have to think winter season, very cold.
We only have outhouses in these rural areas. Well, even in Anchorage, outhouses is what we use. So we have a mantra, up, down, or down, up, down, down. And that's because you have so many layers on, and when it's minus 40, you kind of forget and things are numb. So you got to remember, lift up, pull down, lift up, pull down. And if you're a guest to a house, you're really blessed when they say we've replaced the bubble wrap. And that means they've wrapped the outside toilet seat in bubble wrap so that your chicas don't freeze to the seat.
You have so much energy and drive and ambition and the lessons you've taken, and you've told me how you worked on your speed to run, and I know you work out. Did they ask you, or do you want to come back, or did you just decide you wanted to do this again?
Well, you always get the contract in February, and I talked with my husband. I said, I'm not done yet. And he said, you're not done? And I said, no, there's still some spots I have to go to. I had to go see the pipeline and freeze my tongue to it. I had to go out.
You actually froze your tongue to the pipeline?
To the Alaska pipeline. We went up to almost the north part of Alaska, and we're one of the few people who've ever seen muskox because there's only a small herd left. Everything I didn't get to do the first year. I stayed a second year, and then there were still a few things I didn't get to do, so I stayed a third year, and then I came home.
You came home to a motorcycle guy.
Yes, I did.
And you've done some trips and things with him. You came back to Tellico Village. You could look back on there. Did you bring anything particular home from Alaska?
Yes, I brought a lot of native art, and most importantly, I brought all my treasures from working on the Iditarod, because I would take off in Anchorage and go to the stops to feed the animals, the dogs, not the mushers. They had to take care of themselves.
Now, did you ride on a sled too, or did you ride on a snowmobile, or how did you get, if you did all that distance with them, what was your transportation?
The little prop plane with an 18-year-old driver.
What drew you back to even think about going back a second year? You just felt you hadn't seen enough? Or done enough?
I fell in love with the culture. Their culture makes you stop and be in the moment for everything you do. And when we were climbing glaciers, where I was kayaking with whales, whatever it was, you just sat there and appreciated the moment so that the gratitude was there. And it's such a big state, there's so many things to do. And we kind of made a pact, my roommates and I, we'll do it again. And at the end of each year, we say, we'll do it again. And you just come back with just such a introspective of how wonderful the world
And you
can be.
told me also about the Alaskan people and the children. They have a kindness that was almost new to you, attitude about things.
Yes.
And just for the people that are technically inclined around here, you said Zooming started years ago in Alaska.
Yes, Alaska was probably the first state ever to be connected with internet, because the state capital's in Juneau, and you can't get to Juneau anyway except for flying or taking a ferry, which would take you forever. So they had the networking already in place for all the Zooming that went on.
All right, let's get you here to Tellico Village again. So you're home, and you've taken up some activities together in this new marriage. You're sharing some things. You've done some kayaking.
Yes, we kayak here.
Tell me about motorcycle trips. Where do you go?
Well, Dave motorcycles more with the motorcycle club and a couple of his good friends, and we have been to Sturgis and Daytona, and once you go to Sturgis or Daytona, I think that's all I needed to have with motorcycles.
Do you have a leather jacket with
yes.
something on the back, and do you wear motorcycle boots? And
Oh yes.
play golf? Both of you play
Yes.
golf? And
Yes.
Does it just your husband does woodworking, or do you get into woodworking too?
I do projects around the house woodworking. He works with the woodworking club.
Okay.
They help put the shelving and the cabinets in over at our place.
you told me something special. You have grandchildren.
Yes.
And you told me something special you wanted to do with your grandchildren.
Yes.
So tell us about that.
Well, when they turn 11, it's been kind of a family thing where we take a grandchild, or we were taken to a special place. And for the weeks up to that, you give hints to the child where they're going to go and see if they can guess it. Well, we've decided we're taking our grandkids when they're 11 to Alaska to experience some of the things I had the opportunity to enjoy, and to have them see a whole different culture that is one of our last frontiers out there.
When I was a little child, I remember somewhere, I don't know if I heard it in school or if I read it in a book, that Eskimos rub noses instead of kissing. Is that true?
No, they don't. Now, maybe the Eskimos in the igloos do.
Maybe the ones in the igloos in Canada.
That's right.
Okay.
But not where I was. Your nose would freeze together.
What on earth is next for you?
Oh, I have a few things still coming. You know, my bucket list is still there, ready to roll, and you know, we'll get there. I got to ride a combine, which was one of my bucket list, and I got to do that not too long ago. And so, you know, there are different bucket lists.
You hinted at something to me, though. About a boat trip.
I would like to be able to be one of the cooks on the Nina or Pinta boats as they sail around the United States.
Now, you visited one of them here.
When it was in Loudon.
And you still want to...
Yes.
You still want to be a cook on it?
I do. It's very primitive, but it's just perfect. What a great experience to say you were cook.
And you did keep you did prepare blogs when you got home, and I've seen both of them, and we're going to add your blogs,
good.
mention them on the closing of the show. So thank you so much. It's just been a delight, Sheryl. It really has.
Thank you.
I would like to thank all the volunteers at Tellico Village Network, and thank all of you for listening. And stay tuned for our next show with another fabulous lady of Tellico Village.